1,000 years ago, Norse sailors crossed the North Atlantic and found 18 islands with no trees, no shelter, and wind that never stopped. They stayed. Their descendants are still there, and they have built something no map fully explains. "18 islands, 53,000 people, a parliament founded in 900 AD, 80,000 sheep, and not a single tree." The Faroe Islands do not contain a nation. They are one. Older than most, smaller than all, governed by a parliament that predates England's, fed by an ocean that has never once been kind. 5 chapters, 18 islands, a place where the Prime Minister's phone number is public, where tunnels run beneath the Atlantic floor, and where a waterfall drops 30 meters directly into the sea. A place where nothing is what it first appears. This is the story of the European nation that is not, by any legal definition, a country. And yet it continues, stubbornly, quietly, completely. The world's smallest capital does not look like a capital. It looks like a village that someone accidentally gave a parliament. Tórshavn holds 14,000 people. Its harbor fits a handful of fishing boats. Its streets can be walked end to end in 40 minutes. And at the tip of the Mykines Peninsula, wedged between the harbor and the open Atlantic, a cluster of dark wooden buildings with turf-covered roofs sits exactly where the Viking assembly met for the first time in 900 AD. This is the Løgting, one of the oldest parliaments on Earth. It does not occupy a grand stone edifice. It occupies a few rooms in a wooden house. The Prime Minister lives nearby. His phone number is listed in the public directory. If the Parliament of the Faroe Islands feels modest, that is because modesty here is not a deficiency. It is a principle. Tórshavn is where Faroese identity begins. The old town of Mykines is a labyrinth of narrow lanes and red-painted houses whose timber darkens with each Atlantic winter. No museum explains it. No plaque narrates the view. The buildings simply stand as they have stood for centuries, still used, still lived in, still governing. Beyond Mykines, the modern town spreads across the hillside. A university, a national hospital, a football stadium that hosts a league of 10 teams. The Faroe Islands have never qualified for a World Cup. They have beaten Greece. "20 minutes south, where Stremoi's coast faces the island of Hester across a narrow strait, the village of Kirkjubøur holds the oldest architecture in the Faroes. The Magnus Cathedral stands roofless against the sky. Construction began in the 13th century. It was never finished. "800 years later, the walls still rise. Nave, chancel, arches open to the Atlantic wind. Waiting. Not because it survived wars, because it survived weather. Next to the cathedral, the Kirkjuborgarður farmhouse leans against the hillside. It is the oldest continuously inhabited wooden house in Europe. The same family has lived here for 17 generations. The current residents still farm the surrounding land. The sheep still graze the same slopes their ancestors grazed in 1550. St. Olav's Church, a few steps away, still holds services. The stones are 12th century. The congregation is 21st. The faith between them has not changed. From the village that holds the past, the road leads north, through a sub-sea tunnel beneath Lerviksfjörður, to the city that feeds the present. Klaksvík is the Faroe Islands' second city. 5,200 people, the largest fishing port in the archipelago. Over 90% of Faroese exports come from the sea. In Klaksvík, that statistic is not a number. It is the sound of trawler engines at 4 in the morning. It is the smell of salt and diesel and fresh-caught cod. It is the processing plants that run through the night, packaging salmon and haddock and mackerel for markets in Copenhagen, Tokyo, New York. Inside Kristjanskirkjan, the city's church built in 1963, a full-sized wooden boat from 1890 hangs from the ceiling. An 8-oared fishing vessel suspended above the congregation as if the sea itself had entered the church. The Faroe Islands are not self-sufficient. They are sea-sufficient. Every meal, every mortgage, every school, all of it depends on what the trawlers bring back. The economy does not diversify because it does not need to. The ocean has been enough for 1,000 years. The parliament is 11 centuries old. The roads are brand new, and some of them run under the ocean floor. The parliament is 11 centuries old. The roads are brand new, and some of them run under the ocean floor. Vestmanna's seawalls rise up to 700 meters from the waterline, vertical basalt stacked by volcanic eruption. The boat passes through sea caves where the engine echo returns twice. The cliffs do not need context. They are their own argument. East across Eysturoy Island, at the end of a single road that winds through a valley too narrow for 2 cars, the village of Gjógv sits above a natural gorge that the Atlantic carved directly into the cliff face. The word Gjógv means gorge. The village is named for the crack in the rock that serves as its harbor. Not because someone built a harbor here, because the sea carved one. Fewer than 50 people live in Gjógv. The houses are painted in the colors of a children's book: red, blue, yellow, green, scattered across a slope of grass so vivid it looks synthetic. Stone walls, older than most European cities, divide the fields. The wind crosses the village without resistance. There are no trees to slow it. There have never been trees. And yet, Gjøgv has fiber optic internet, a helipad, a guest house that takes reservations online. The village exists at the precise intersection of the medieval and the modern. A place where a farmer can check wool futures on a smartphone while standing in a field that has been grazed since the 11th century. South along the coast, 2 sea stacks rise from the fog. Rissin, 71 meters. Kellingin, 68. A giant and his wife, sent from Iceland to drag the Faroes north. The sun rose before they finished. The light turned them to stone. They have not moved since. West across Streymoy, past the mountain road that did not exist until 1960, the valley of Saksun opens without warning. Steep walls on 3 sides, a tidal lagoon at the center, a turf-roofed church reflected in water the ocean fills and empties twice a day. At low tide, the water retreats entirely, leaving black sand and silence. But infrastructure only takes you so far. Beyond the tunnels, beyond the roads, the Faroe Islands keep their most impossible landscapes behind footpaths that existed before anyone thought to build a road. Beyond the tunnels, beyond the roads, the Faroe Islands keep their most impossible landscapes behind footpaths that existed before anyone thought to build a road. The village of Gásadalur sits at the western edge of Vágar Island. Fewer than 20 residents. One road. A single-lane tunnel carved through the mountain, opened in 2006. Before the tunnel, there was no road. No path that did not require climbing 400 meters of rock. The mail arrived by rope. The groceries arrived by rope. The children went to school in the next village by climbing over the mountain and back every day, in every weather. Not because it is beautiful, because for centuries, almost no one could reach it. And at the edge of the village, the river that drains the plateau above drops 30 meters off a basalt cliff directly into the Atlantic Ocean. Múlafossur. No pool at the bottom. No rocks to break the fall. The water simply leaves the land and enters the sea in a single vertical gesture. The waterfall has not changed since the Norse found it. The village behind it has barely changed either. What changed was a tunnel. One tunnel. And suddenly the world could see what Gásadalur had been keeping to itself for 1,000 years. Six kilometers east along the same island, the largest lake in the Faroe Islands performs an optical trick that no amount of explanation can fully resolve. Sørvágsvatn sits at an elevation of 30 meters. The Atlantic lies directly below it. From the cliff edge of Trálanipa, the Slave Rock, named for the enslaved workers who were thrown from its edge in the Middle Ages, the lake appears to hover above the ocean. The eye insists the water is suspended in the air. The mind knows it cannot be. The photograph confirms what the mind denies. The cliff is not fenced. The edge is not marked. The Faroese relationship with dangerous heights is the same as their relationship with dangerous seas. Respectful, familiar, unafraid. At the lake's western outlet, the water spills over a second cliff as the Bøsdalafossur waterfall, dropping into the ocean below. Two waterfalls on one island, both falling directly into the sea. Vágar does not do things by half. Between the lake and the sea stacks, the village of Bør faces west. 70 residents, turf roofs, a view that belongs in a different geological era. And out in the water, two sea stacks rise from the Atlantic like the entrance to something that no longer exists. Stóri Drangur stands 64 meters tall. Litli Drangur, 38. Between them, a natural arch connects the two. Stone spanning open ocean, eroded by 10,000 years of tide. The hike from Bør takes 3 hours. Since 2019, a guide is mandatory. The path crosses unmarked moorland, navigates loose scree, and arrives at a viewpoint where the stacks and the arch and the 5-peaked silhouette of Tindhólmur behind them compose a landscape so improbable it became a global phenomenon through a single drone photograph. The Faroe Islands did not market Drangarnir. They did not build a visitor center. A photographer flew a drone. The internet did the rest. Now, the stacks that local fishermen used as navigation markers for centuries are among the most recognizable rock formations on Earth. Vágar holds the cliffs and the waterfalls and the sea stacks. But the Faroe Islands keep their most fragile truth not in the rock. They keep it in the villages that cling to the northern coast, the ones that chose to stay when staying stopped making sense. Vágar holds the cliffs and the waterfalls and the sea stacks. But the Faroe Islands keep their most fragile truth not in the rock. They keep it in the villages that cling to the northern coast. The ones that chose to stay when staying stopped making sense. The road to Tjørnuvík drops through a tunnel and arrives at a black sand beach that the Vikings found in the 10th century. The sand is still black. The waves still arrive from the same direction. The sea stacks, risin og kellingin, are visible from the shore. The same two figures the Norse named 1,000 years ago, still frozen, still waiting for a task they will never complete. Approximately 70 people live in Tjørnuvík. The village has a football pitch, a small church, and a reputation among a handful of surfers who have discovered that the North Atlantic produces waves worth crossing oceans for. The water temperature never rises above 8 degrees. The surfers wear hoods, gloves, boots, and expressions of specific devotion. In Tjørnuvík, history is not excavated. It is walked on. 10th century Viking graves were discovered beneath the village in 1956. The artifacts went to the National Museum. The village kept farming. North, past the last tunnel, past the last stretch of paved road that connects the Northern Islands, the village of Viðareiði occupies the position that its name describes, the wide isthmus. It is the northernmost settlement in the Faroe Islands, 340 people. A white church built in 1892, and behind the church, rising without preamble or apology, Cape Eneberg. 754 meters of vertical cliff, one of the tallest sea cliffs on the planet. Not because the cliff is 754 meters tall, because people built a church at the bottom of it. Viðareiði is not dramatic despite its location. It is dramatic because of it. The village does not cower beneath the cliff. It faces it. The church windows look north toward open water. The graveyard sits between the congregation and the Atlantic. The wind that crosses Cape Eneberg does not pause for the village. The village does not expect it to. The subsea tunnel that connected Viðoy to the rest of the Faroes opened in 2016. Before that, the only way in or out was by boat, weather permitting. The people of Viðareiði did not leave when the tunnel arrived. They stayed exactly where they were. They had been staying for 1,000 years. A tunnel was not going to change the habit. But the most fragile settlement in the Faroes is not the northernmost. It is the westernmost. Mykines lies at the outer edge of the archipelago, separated from Vágar by a strait that the ferry cannot cross on roughly half the days of the year. 10 people live here through the winter. In summer, 500,000 Atlantic puffins arrive and outnumber the human population 50,000 to 1. The island has no cars.
no roads. A single path connects the village to the lighthouse on Mykines Holmur, crossing a footbridge above a gorge where the wind has been known to knock hikers sideways. The puffins nest in burrows along the cliff edge, emerging at dawn and dusk in clouds so dense they darken the headland. Mykines is where the human story of the Faroe Islands gives way to something older. The birds were here first. They will be here last. The 10 residents who remain through the dark months do not own the island. They coexist with it, an arrangement that requires more humility than most modern lives demand. There is one more place, not a village, not a city, a single lighthouse on a single ridge where the Faroe Islands finally run out of land.
There is one more island. Not the largest, not the most populated, the narrowest. Kalsoy is called the Flute. Long, thin, threaded with a single road that passes through 4 tunnels cut into the mountain. 75 people live on the entire island. 4 villages survive. Two more sit abandoned, their stone walls collapsing slowly into the grass, their windows open to weather that will eventually take the rest. The road ends at Trollanes, the northernmost village. Population, 20. Beyond it, a footpath crosses the ridge toward the northern tip of the island. The walk takes 45 minutes. No railing, no fence, no sound except the wind. The path follows a ridge that drops 200 meters on both sides, east to the Atlantic, west to the Atlantic. There is no shelter. The grass is short and salt-burned. The sheep that graze here do not look up. They are accustomed to the edge. At the end of the ridge, Kallur Lighthouse stands alone on the final spur of land. Built in 1927, never staffed, automated from the beginning. A white tower on a green headland above a sea that stretches uninterrupted to Iceland, to the Arctic, to the end of every map. This is where the Faroe Islands stop. Not with a harbor, not with a city, with a single lighthouse on a ridge that no one needs to walk, but everyone who comes here does. The light still turns. The wind still crosses the ridge without interruption. The sheep still graze at the edge. And from this point, looking south, every island in the archipelago is visible. 18 fragments of basalt scattered across the North Atlantic, held together not by bridges or tunnels or treaties, but by the quiet, stubborn decision of 53,000 people that this particular arrangement of rock and wind and sea is worth calling home. Mykines is where the Faroe Islands run out of villages. Kalsoy is where they run out of land, and Kalur is where they stop trying to explain themselves and simply stand. A 1,000 years ago, Norse sailors crossed the North Atlantic and found 18 islands with no trees, no shelter, and wind that never stopped. They stayed. They built a parliament before England had one. They dried their meat in the wind because there was no other way. They carved tunnels under the ocean because the ferries could not always cross. They named their sea stacks after giants and never stopped believing the story. They built churches at the base of 700-meter cliffs and buried their dead between the congregation and the sea. The Faroe Islands are not a country. They have no army, no seat at the United Nations, no forest, no railway. What they have is something more specific, a place where 53,000 people decided that this particular arrangement of rock and wind and sea was worth more than sovereignty, more than convenience, more than explanation. If this journey stirred something in you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes the world holds places worth finding. They stayed. They are still there.